This data visualization illustrates a crisis in American religious life. Look at the highlighted section. 1 out of every 4 Protestant senior pastors has seriously considered walking away from full-time ministry. Behind that number is a standard operating procedure we call doing for. It is the default posture of modern faith work, an endless loop of fixing problems, producing weekly programs, and managing the congregation's spiritual development. Taking on the burden of solving everyone else's problems creates intense structural drag. It forces a leader to constantly output energy, effectively borrowing against their own future emotional capacity to keep the machinery of the church running. Pastoral exhaustion is not a failure of individual stamina. It is a systemic flaw in the structural design of modern ministry. We built this model on a specific assumption about the life of Jesus. We tend to picture his time on earth as a 3-year sprint of healing, teaching, and crisis management. Theologian Sam Wells proposes that with is the most important word in the Bible. He defines God through the lens of relationship rather than through distance and repair. Working for people creates a transactional ledger, a heavy one-way flow of energy. Simply being with someone in their suffering, without trying to solve it, provides a different value that nourishes both people. To address the burnout epidemic, we have to look past our modern assumptions about productivity and map the actual timeline of how Jesus spent his life. Curious, that timeline reveals the Nazareth ratio, a theological blueprint that radically reallocates how a leader's time should be spent. Jesus spent a single week here, in Jerusalem, working for humanity to achieve salvation. That accounts for exactly 1% of his life. He spent roughly 3 years working with his followers around the Sea of Galilee, organizing them and sharing the message. That covers another 9%. The remaining 90% of his time on earth was spent in Nazareth. For 30 years, he was simply being with people in the daily reality of their struggles. If God spent 90% of his incarnate life simply being present, building an entire profession around doing things for people is a significant theological distortion. To see if this shift in posture works, researchers conducted the relational pivot study, analyzing the experiences of faith workers moving between these two modes. This matrix displays the results. Researchers categorized the emotional states of leaders during moments of doing for versus being with. Under doing for, leaders described themselves as drained, heavy, and isolated. But under being with, the data shifts. Emotional descriptors become generative, light, and connected. Mimicking that 90% posture of shared presence provides a functional relief valve. The study proves it produces a measurable emotional and physiological restoration in the leader. The mechanism behind this relief is the relinquishing of the fixer burden, the false belief that the leader is personally responsible for generating God's presence in a room. Dropping that burden is not an act of giving up. It is a release of impossible psychological tension. This posture requires disciplined trust. It is the recognition that God is already present in the suffering before the leader even arrives. When a leader stops spending their own capacity trying to fix unfixable problems, that energy is reciprocated and returned to them through shared human connection. Faith organizations are facing a choice. The doing for posture leads to depletion, while the being with posture reliably sustains the worker. Surviving modern ministry does not require more resilient individuals or larger programmatic budgets. It requires a re-engineering of institutional priorities. By correcting the ratio and shifting from doing for to being with, leaders dismantle the design flaw that creates exhaustion, finding sustainment through a presence that was always meant to be the point.